It is possible for many improbable things to be true. It is also possible for two different or even opposing things to be true at the same time. This is a both and, not an either or discussion. Hey, this Ramon channel is Alpha 4. This is probably the most important video I've ever done. As you know, I'm closing out my religion discussion on my channel, but for some reason I've had an influx of interesting and important topics come across my path. So at least my subscriber base is growing again. The title of this video is The Problem of Evil Revisited. About a year ago, or a little bit more, maybe 2 years ago, I made a video on the topic of sin as part of my larger discussion around hell. And in this discussion, I defined what sin was, what evil was, and I did a pretty good job. Actually, I went back and I read that script, and I'm probably going to put a summary of it underneath this video. It was really good stuff. Very intellectual, very smooth. This, on the other hand, while more important, might be lacking some of that polish, as I have less time to develop the script as I used to. I want to make a few things clear up front. Today we are going to be talking about the problem of evil, not the problem of suffering, and not the definition of sin, not the existence of free will, nor how to reconcile those concepts with the concept of predestination. For those are different issues. And the reason we are going to be talking about the problem of evil is because an anti-vaxxer gave me a hard dilemma with grave moral and major ethical implications to deal with. While many of her objections to vaccinations in general were easy to dismiss, and even her arguments against mandatory vaccination could be reasonably argued against, she brought up one issue that I could neither dismiss nor easily reason my way out of. So, the dilemma. Do I have a moral obligation to refuse aid and safety if that aid comes from the suffering and or death, destruction of another living being? Here, more specifically, if I am pro-life or anti-abortion, do I bear any personal responsibility for willingly and knowingly receiving the administration of a particular set of vaccines that I know come from aborted human fetal tissue? For real-world context, there are 3 known vaccines that get their gene line cultures and serum from discarded human material, that material being aborted fetal tissue. The vaccines that are grown in these fetal cells include varicella for chickenpox, shingles, hepatitis A, and rubella, as well as upcoming experimental vaccines to fight cancer through biogene therapy being developed in the US, and at least one possible effective SARS-CoV-2 vaccine out of Beijing, China, among other less notable vaccines and serums. So let me make this clear. I am not making fun of this woman's concerns. Her other fears surrounding this topic, expressed to me through our many interactions and follow-ups, are very real and can be substantiated by recent history. And her distrust of authority, the medical community, and governments both big and small, does come from a real place. For instance, in Kenya, women have been sterilized without their consent in false vaccine programs as part of an ongoing tribal genocide. In California, from 1909 to 1970, a eugenics program against low-income families sterilized over 20,000 people. And at least 32 states had similar bad faith programs aimed at Native American indigenous people, the mentally ill, and Black Americans of African descent. My sources here are going to be the Washington Post, WHO International, and PBS.org. In fact, up until 2010, female inmates in California have undergone coerced sterilization under false pretenses until the act was outlawed as unethical. In Alabama, these mislabeled birth control or contraception methods were administered to illiterate black girls as young as 12, requiring them to only mark an X as their signature of consent at the bottom of paperwork they were unable to read or understand. So the mistrust and fear that my viewer feels is not unreasonable nor unjustified. Therefore, I will address her fear of moral compromise head on in this video. Let's get into the meat of the problem. So to understand her dilemma and to answer her fear, we will need to ask several leading questions. Questions that I will give my personal answers to at the end of this video. Here are those questions. Does evil exist? Can God or the gods prevent evil? Is God or this divine power all-knowing? Is God all-powerful? Does he whom we call God want to prevent evil? Why does evil exist? Could God have created a reality without evil? Is this reality? Am I alive? If I am, what does it mean to be alive? Do I seek justice, revenge, or forgiveness? Am I evil? There are three main players to examine when thinking of these questions: the principal agent or actor, the cooperator, and the recipient of these actions. The question of can evil exist in a vacuum will not be discussed here. So what will be discussed? Well, there is the question of responsibility for cooperation with these acts. Is my cooperation formal? Do I strictly intend for an act to incur? Material. Do I not intend for an act to incur, but I understand that I may contribute substantially to a desire to commit an act? Immediate. Do I directly provide material necessary for an act to occur? Immediate. Do I merely provide material that can facilitate an event, but is not necessary for an act to occur? Proximate. Do I contribute to the commission of an act? Remote. Do I merely contribute to general conditions that do not necessitate an act to occur? Opposed. Do I actively put up hurdles to the act? There are four commonly presented philosophical lenses to view this problem through. The lenses here are, and these are not necessarily how I define these terms, but merely convenient definitions for how people I've interacted with have presented these options. Atheism. There is no overarching objective morality to measure my actions against. Theism. There is an overriding power that enables, limits, and controls my actions, options, and choices. Dualism. There are two competing, one active and one passive moral routes for my actions and choices. Pantheism. There are many powers, abstractions, and drives, some more powerful than others, competing with my motivations that add to or dispel my moral culpability toward any act. So, now we must ask, what is good and what is evil? For me, good is that which tends toward what is suitable or befitting. Evil is the privation or absence of good. So now we must speculate and postulate what are the conditions necessary for any event or act to be considered good or evil. First, there must be an event. An act must occur. And for it to fall into the realm of morality, that act must be an expression of virtue or sin. And for us to take responsibility for it, a choice has to have been made. A judgment must have taken place for guilt or innocence, that is, for culpability to be assigned or assumed. Second, for it to be evil, it must violate all three of these elements: the laws of nature, that is natural law, the free will of one of the three players, that is consent, and go against faith. Here, faith representing ethical morality. So, just to be clear, what we are doing here in this video is a type of virtue epistemology. We are weighing an event, receiving a vaccine whose cultures or serum came of aborted human fetal tissue, as being either victorious, virtuous, or sinful, based on the actors, the players involved, conviction, confidence, reliability, and belief or disbelief as it surrounds the event in question. Let it also be said that this will expose my two competing observations on life. One, that not everything has a reason. Some things just happen. Chaos is possible and does exist. Nothingness or void is. And randomness is not only possible, but is sometimes necessary. And two, that everything that has a beginning has a cause. Some things are planned or predestined. That which was chaotic can be ordered. Change is possible. Things exist. And that which exists can never be fully destroyed. It can only be changed from one form to another. But my definitions and conclusion in this video will not be perfect, as it will not answer the problem of retroactive causes. That is, it will not answer the question of if causation can work backwards. It will not show if the future is affecting the past. And it will concede to one caveat, that is that partial or divided truth is dead and non-existent. Doubt as necessity. It is a necessary precondition for knowledge and mature faith. So, what is an event? An event is an act which occurred. This act can be conditional or unconditional, causal or evidential. If causal, then the act is part of a chain of events that lead to some final effect, which depends on a prime cause. If evidential, then it is an act that never had to occur, and that act can be random or unnecessary. Examples: Jacob wrestled with God. Jesus' moment of doubt on the cross. You taking a vaccine. Am I a rugged individual, or are we members of a civilized society? Judgment is an exercise of natural rights and choice. This choice can be free, limited, or false. If the judgment is universal, then the choice implies a formal obligation. It sets or confirms to an objective morality. And the same judgment must be applied to any case or situation, regardless of if the subject is general or specific, abstract or concrete. If the judgment is only relative, then it only applies to this individual event in this specific moment. The act is disassociated from the whole. It does not reflect nor set a standard for social norms. Examples: God spares Isaac, ending the pagan rite of human sacrifice. Jesus forgives the thief on the cross, exemplifying grace for future Christians to come. I choose to take a vaccine that will save my life, although it comes at a cost of another's. Then there is a question of guilt or culpability. How far am I permitted to extend my personal responsibility or accountability? Is bearing the consequences the same as reaping the benefits? If an act or event takes place, can I reasonably take responsibility of the consequences of that act or event on myself, even without the free choice in the commission of the act or action? Let me say that again. If I am missing the free choice in the commission of an act, do I still bear responsibility for that act? Examples: Abraham is declared worthy by God for his willingness to obey an action true, but an action that was never taken. While the thief believed in Jesus without understanding, without foreknowledge, and was given grace which he neither earned nor deserved. I will live a healthier life. My wife gets a husband who will live longer, and my son gets a father who can be active in his life because I chose to receive a vaccination that does come and did come with risk and cost associated with it. Oh, that was kind of heavy. All right, now let's take a brief and quick look at the other factors before I lay out any of my conclusions. The laws of nature, or natural law, can be composed of two factors: the intrinsic and the extrinsic. The intrinsic is that which is, reality as it is, not as we wish it or hope it to be. This is moral law and ethical norms as they apply in real life, the practical application of our principles and maxims. Then there is the intrinsic, relativity, those virtues whose value and worth can only be weighed and measured insofar as they relate to something or someone else. Examples here would be Jesus' sacrifice is moral. Though a sin was committed by those whom committed the deeds that led to his act, it is still moral because it redeemed the whole world and gave many the chance and the option of choosing to accept grace. That is forgiveness, mercy. Isaac's sacrifice would have been for the good of one man, an example of his father's obedience and blind faith. So while the willingness to obey and submit was needed, the actual death was not. So it was substituted with that of a lamb. Some Christians will cite that as an example of substitutionary atonement. The child in question is already dead. If it were the cells of an old man or old woman whom had lived their full life, whom had lived their life to the fullest, and they donated their cells to medicine and science willfully and knowingly, would we have the same revulsion to their sacrifice? What is choice but the expression of will? The power to determine self without undue compulsion or outside coercion. The ability to act. This act can be free, unlimited, and therefore we are ultimately responsible for our own actions and choices, regardless of the circumstances or the conditionals. Unlimited free will. Or this will can be limited free will. This will can be subject to destiny and fate, able to choose but limited by options and abilities. Or this will can be locked in to choices and actions by predestination, subject to hard determinism, and have no control over its options or decisions. In this last option, all causality would ultimately be an expression of God's will alone. I'm sure there's a lot of atheists who have a lot more to say on that last one. And Calvinist. The Bible shows support for all three of these interpretations at different times. Job is the best example of how these three paradoxes work in concert. But Jesus and his mother Mary, each having the option to say no, yet choosing to fulfill God's will, their Father's will, and not their own, are also good examples of how free will can work in a reality where predestination can also exist. If not you, then someone else. If someone else, then you were never really the one to begin with. Many are called, few are chosen. The example of this here would be how the child has no choice in the decision, has no choice in the donation of his or her cells after its death. No man can serve two masters, for either you will hate one and love the other, or else you will hold to one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and mammon. Knowledge is also important to establishing responsibility. If your knowledge of an act or potential act is full, that is, that the knowledge is explicit, then it is easier to show culpability. If, on the other hand, your knowledge of an act is merely implicit, meaning subconscious, or partial, or even false, having incorrect knowledge, then is harder and maybe even impossible to show culpability. Age of reason and statutory laws and limitations are applied here. Examples: a good Christian, a good Hindu, and a good Muslim are each equally good, as long as they are only acting based solely on the presupposition that their belief system is correct. If they have full knowledge of the other faiths, then the abstraction is lost. One must choose which maxim or principle to obey. An example of this would be, do we know that the vaccine that we are accepting comes from this or that source? Next comes intent. Intent can be intentional. That means intended consequences, and therefore wholly of your moral reckoning, or unintentional, unintended consequences, and therefore at least partially not of your responsibility to answer for. Examples of this is the Roman persecution of the Christians as described or prophesied in Revelation, is something the Roman Empire had to answer for. The sacking of the temple, the killing of the Jews at Masada, Christians being thrown to the lions and burnt as Roman candles. But the crucifixion of Jesus, Pontius Pilate washes his hands of the deed, for he gave the people, the mob, a way out, and they chose not to take it, lessening his moral responsibility for the act that he oversaw and allowed. More on this a little later in our discussion. So now here's the example for this one. The question is, did I intend for the child to die for the sole purpose of harvesting its genes to grow a vaccine for myself? That's the question we've come to in this moral dilemma that you have given us. Again, thank you, my friend, for giving us this question. All right, so now we get to it. Here's the main event. It all comes down to these next two questions, these next two factors. It is a matter of faith, and there are two types of faith at work within this problem. Good faith, that is voluntary conviction to a truth value, and bad faith, that is self-deception by willful ignorance for the sake of convenience. Examples of this, both good and bad faith. Abraham goes to sacrifice Isaac because he mistakenly thinks it is God's will that Isaac should die. This is done in good faith. Not just because it has a good result at the end where Isaac is saved, but because Abraham doesn't know any better and thinks that he is doing the right thing because the tradition and culture around him tells him this is the right thing to do. Then let's look at the next one. Judas betrays Jesus for silver, knowing fully that he is the Messiah, and then hanging himself because he doesn't like the results of his own actions. This is bad faith. He lied to himself. He self-deceived himself and deceived other people, and the consequences were grave. He knew Jesus was the Messiah, and yet he betrayed him. He knowingly betrayed him. And he lied to himself about what the results of that betrayal would be. And when his guilt of those results was too much, he killed himself. That is bad faith. So now we end on the question of morality. Is there objective morality, an absolute, categorical, and inviolable ethical standards that are not merely the result of political need or human desire? Or are all ethical standards merely a product of subjective morality, which is relative and dependent on constitution, situation, and perspective? All right, so now let's finish the video. As I said, when I got through this discussion and I examined all the points and all the variables, I would then come back to the initial questions. So let's look at these questions again. Does evil exist? Yes. Can God or the gods prevent evil? Most definitely, yes, of course. Is God or this divine power all-knowing? Yes. Is God all-powerful? Yes. Does he whom we call God want to prevent evil? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe for those whom he favors. But maybe we, as mortals, simply confuse suffering for evil. Why does evil exist? Because God allows it. Could God have created a reality without evil? He did. It's called heaven. Is this reality? Yes. Am I alive? Yes. Do I seek justice, revenge, or forgiveness? Forgiveness. Am I evil? No, but I am capable of it. So, I think it's clear where my decision is on this topic. As I have said in other videos, my views have changed greatly, and as well as in subtle and nuanced ways since reading the Church Fathers. And though I have not read all the Church Father material that I want to have read, I've now been reading them for 2 or 3 years in the Liturgy of the Hours, and my views have become more orthodox because of it. The divine office is a powerful, powerful tool for Christians. Liturgy is extremely important. So I kind of misquoted a Coptic in the last video, and I'd like to clean it up a little bit. He said that there are 4 main pillars of holy faith. And these 4 main pillars of holy faith or holy tradition, these 4 pillars are scripture, oral tradition, apostolic writings, and for Catholics, the magisterium, or that is the church. Those 4 pieces working together congruently help give us holy tradition. They help define our religion. So with something like this, the Catholic answer is to go to the church and see what it says. There are specialty resources for bioethics, for Catholic bioethics and Christian bioethics, for things like this. These are hard and complicated questions. I'm very glad that you asked this question of me, because this is not somewhere that I'm comfortable going, nor is it somewhere that I would have gone on my own. Thank you so much for responding. I hope you watched this video. Everyone else watching, if anyone stayed through this whole video, thank you so much. Peace, like, and subscribe. I'll talk to you all later. If my channel keeps on growing, I'll keep making videos, guys, so please subscribe.